On the 14th of October 1965, Mary Little was a 25-year-old secretary at the CNS Bank in Atlanta, Georgia. She married a man named Roy Little just 6 weeks prior. He was out of town at the time. He was a bank examiner. He was training to become an auditor, but was coming back the next day. She was preparing for a welcoming party for when he returned. She decided to go out after work to purchase some groceries and then meet up with a co-worker for dinner. They met at the Piccadilly cafeteria in an upscale part of the neighbourhood of Atlanta within the Lenox Square shopping centre. Mary was in high spirits at the time and spoke happily about her married life. At approximately 8 p.m, she walked back to her car after dinner and was never heard from again. When Mary hadn't shown up for work the following morning or called in sick, her boss discussed her absence with her co-worker she dined with the previous night. Her co-worker recalled that Mary's new metallic pearl grey 1965 Mercury Comet with Georgia number plates was parked in a yellow designated lot near Lenox Square. Initially, the car couldn't be located by security guards, but by midday, Mary's bank supervisor arrived at Lenox Square. The car was in plain sight, in the spot where it was supposed to have been. There was a film of red dust on the car's exterior, as if it had been driven down a dirt trail, and the groceries were inside. There were also slips, panties, a girdle, a bra, and a single stocking. Most of the items had been neatly folded and placed on the console between the front bucket seats, but the bra and the stocking were on the floor, which had a tear in it. The underwear was Mary's and appeared to have been worn recently. Mary's outer clothes, purse, coat, jewellery, and her car keys all went missing and have never been located. There were small traces of dried red flecks on her undergarments that were examined by investigators, along with smears on the steering wheel. There were also signs of spots on the driver's side door, inside the passenger side window, and on the front seat. All of the findings were deemed likely to have come from Mary. Several police officers thought the scene was staged due to the exaggerated smearing of the small amount of the fluid, including an unidentified red fingerprint on the steering wheel. The authorities later learned that Mary's credit card had been used twice in North Carolina on the 15th of October, the following day after her disappearance. The first time was at Esso Station in Mary's hometown of Charlotte. The second time was at another Esso in Raleigh. The workers at both stations recalled seeing a woman who appeared to have a minor injury to her head and had red staining there as well as her legs. Both attendants told the investigators that the woman was travelling with one or two unshaven middle-aged men who seemed to be telling her what to do. The woman appeared to be hiding her face using a road map from the attendants, and she did not ask for any help. The credit card had been used in the early hour mornings of the 15th of October in Charlotte and a half a day later in Raleigh. This puzzled investigators. Not only was Charlotte Mary's hometown and the city where the family resided, but Raleigh was only 2 to 3 hours away by car. The long span of time between credit card usages seemed unusual, considering the short distances between the two cities. It was suspected that whoever had Mary was purposefully trying to deviate the investigation away from Atlanta. Their signatures on the credit slips read Mrs. Roy H. Little Jr. and appeared to be in Mary's handwriting. Using Roy's mileage logs and Mary's odometer, investigators estimated that the car had 41 miles that could not be accounted for. Another peculiarity of Mary's case emerged when the license plate on the car turned out to be a Charlotte, North Carolina plate that had been stolen in mid-October. Mary's car was legal in Georgia and had been fitted with the proper tags. Investigators believe that the stolen plate was a clue as to why the vehicle was not located by the Lenox Square security before the bank supervisor drove to the lot and discovered the car himself. Detectives thought that whoever drove Mary's car to the lot may have kept it hidden on the night of her disappearance, only to return it to its original parking position later. This theory was never proven. If the car was in fact moved, it would have been about the same time that Mary was seen in North Carolina. A phone call requesting a payment of $20,000 was made for Mary's safe return after news surfaced about the credit card slips. An unidentified caller told her husband to go to an overpass in Pisgah National Forest in western North Carolina and he'll find further directives posted on a sign. An investigator went there in Roy's place and found a blank piece of paper stuck to a sign. The anonymous caller remained just that and never contacted the Little family again, and the demands were suspected to have been a cruel hoax. At one point, police investigated Roy as a possible suspect in his wife's disappearance. Some of Mary's friends boycotted their wedding because they didn't like him and found him to be cold, irritable and remote. Roy reportedly seemed uncaring and oddly detached about her disappearance. He came across as if he was more concerned about getting his car back. He refused to take a lie detector test on numerous occasions. Roy, however, was never charged with anything in connection with her disappearance due to a strong alibi. There were no marital issues identified, and the investigators felt he had nothing to gain from it. Some suggested that Mary's disappearance might have been connected to a scandal at her workplace around the time she vanished. The bank had hired a detective to investigate claims of possible active street workers on the property. Mary was aware of the scandal, but was believed to have had nothing to do with her case. Within weeks leading up to her disappearance, Mary received unsettling phone calls at work. She gave indications to the caller that she was married and could no longer go out to see the unknown person, but he or she was welcome to visit her. Mary also received flowers from a secret admirer in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. The bouquets were traced to a florist near Mary's home, but the purchaser's identity was unknown. Mary never shared the details of the strange calls or discussed the flowers with anyone. According to some of her friends, she was afraid of being home alone or driving her car by herself in the weeks prior to her disappearance. She didn't explain why she felt unsafe. Just days before she went missing, Mary insinuated to her co-workers that she had something urgent to tell them, but never said what it was. In May of 1967, 18 months after Mary vanished, another young woman named Diane Schulz, who briefly worked in the same office, had her life taken. She was last seen leaving her work in a blue and white Chevrolet Impala. The following day, her car was found near a laundry in Atlanta, with her body inside the trunk. She was fully clothed and was wearing her diamond engagement ring. Police speculated that the two cases may have been connected, since the women worked at the same place, but eventually that theory was thrown out. The police file of Mary's case also went missing sometime in the years following her vanishing. While some investigators believe that Mary could have staged her own disappearance and there was no foul play, others felt differently and believed that she was taken against her will. It was reported that on the evening when Mary walked to her car, that a woman was abruptly approached by a man in Lenox Square shopping centre parking lot, which could have had something to do with her disappearance. His identity, however, is a mystery, and the case remains unsolved.
Diane Broadbeck was a 43-year-old woman who lived in Wellsville, Pennsylvania. She was happily married to her husband Chester of 25 years, and they had 2 daughters together. She previously worked as a bank manager, was interested in psychology, and was an active member in her community. She had participated in church programs for over 20 years. During her spare time, she enjoyed writing letters to prisoners that had no family or friends. In 1982, she began writing to John Yout after a friend of hers was unable to keep writing to him. In 1966, John was a popular math teacher at a high school in Du Bois, Pennsylvania. On the 28th of April that year, one of his honor students, 18-year-old Pamela Sue Reimer, accepted a ride after he offered to drive her home. Later that afternoon, her school books were found dumped along a country road. A few hours later, a search team discovered her body in the nearby forest. The following day, John turned himself in to the police and confessed to taking her life. He was sentenced to life in prison. After 20 years behind bars, he became a model prisoner. He played the organ for the choir, learned computer programming, and taught others in the prison school. After corresponding with each other for a few months, Diane began to visit John at the local jail. He was later transferred to Rockview Prison, which was a 2-hour drive away, but Diane still managed to visit him weekly. The prison warden, Walter Regal, saw the two kissing and hugging during the visits, assuming that she was his girlfriend. They became romantically involved, but her family and friends were clueless. In February 1985, John wrote to Diane, professing his love for her and that he wanted to escape prison to be with her. Due to his good behavior, he was allowed to work unsupervised on a farm outside of the prison grounds to cut some hay. On the morning of April 5th, 1986, he took other prisoners with him to different areas and then disappeared. That same day, the warden was driving to a bowling alley when he spotted Diane driving towards the prison. This was the last time she was seen. Both John and Diane had vanished that day. The investigators questioned Chester about them. He explained that Diane had told him she was going to Williamsburg, Virginia for the weekend. The authorities discovered that Diane had opened a bank account, which Chester knew nothing about, and withdrew $7,500, and kept her car in a storage facility in the weeks prior to her disappearance. They also found that the two had spoken on the phone on the night of the 4th of April. Most people that knew Diane believed that she had good judgment and felt she wouldn't have assisted him in the escape. 1 month after her disappearance, her car was found abandoned at a motel 20 miles from her home. A bag was found in the trunk which contained several of her personal items, including her jewelry, cosmetics, and underwear. Police speculated Diane had assisted John in his escape and that she could have been in danger. It was suspected that he could have taken her life and he would be free to do whatever he wanted. This, however, was not confirmed. The other possible theory they had was that Diane and John fell in love and they were both living together under different aliases. Her family did not believe this theory, but they hoped that Diane was still alive. They suspected that Diane was being held against her will. The case was solved after the story was broadcast on Unsolved Mysteries on the 18th of May, 1988. After 2 years on the run, it was discovered that Diane and John were found living in Boise, Idaho, after 2 viewers recognized Diane. She had been using the alias Kathy Kerman and had been working as a bank manager while John worked in computer programming. After a month-long investigation, the couple were arrested at their home. Diane stated at the time that she wanted to put this whole phase of her life behind her, and added, "How could I be so stupid?" Diane served 2 years in prison for helping John escape, and she has since been released. Sadly, her husband passed away in 1995, and John took his life in prison in April of 2012.
In the year 1995, Jessica Mullenberg was a 13-year-old girl who lived in Wisconsin. Her parents were divorced. Her mother, Monica, maintained primary custody, while her dad, Dale, had weekend visitation rights at his house. One of Jessica's teacher's aides at her school became obsessed with her and began lavishing extravagant gifts on her. He was so infatuated that he followed her when she and her family moved to different cities in Wisconsin. He eventually got a place across the road from Dale when he settled down in Eau Claire. Monica felt uncomfortable with Stephen since he was following her family around and befriending the neighbourhood children. She sought a restraining order against him, but since he hadn't done anything wrong, it couldn't be applied. Then on the 16th of September 1995, Jessica was visiting Dale and Oliver convinced her dad that a publisher was interested in a story that she'd written. He said he needed to take her to Madison, Wisconsin to oversee a book of her work to get it published. He lured her away and she wasn't seen again. The case was solved after a motel manager recognised Stephen after seeing him profiled on America's Most Wanted episode, aired on the 1st of December 1995. He was staying at the Days Inn at Houston and was working there as a painter at the time. On the 28th of the same month, he was arrested and Jessica was located alive and reunited with her family. They were living in the motel as father and daughter. He was confirmed to be a child predator and was sentenced to 40 years in prison.